everybody. Welcome to my channel, Loving the Covenant. And here I talk about apologetics. And my name is Corey, and I'm going to be talking about Marxism, socialism, and communism and critiquing them from a Christian worldview using scripture, really. Um, so without a further ado, let's get right into it. I want to start out with a couple of definitions. So let's define capitalism. Okay, and I'm going to be using uh, Britannica, and I'm going to be using a website that gives me access to Marxist literature. I'm also going to be using the Penguin Classics edition of um, the Communist Manifesto, and I'm going to be reading from World Religions and Cults when it comes to a couple of things about Marxism and Leninism. So let's start with defining capitalism. Okay. Capitalism is a widely adopted economic system in which there is private ownership of the means of production. Modern capitalist systems usually include a market-oriented economy in which the production and pricing of goods, as well as the income of individuals, are dictated to a greater extent by market forces resulting from interactions between private businesses and individuals than by central planning undertaken by a government or local institution. Capitalism is built on the concepts of private property, profit motive, and market competition. So I would argue, and I think it's very obvious, that the Bible teaches free market capitalism. So essentially, capitalism is the biblical Christian idea that the people, private individuals, have the right to own, use, um, and utilize the means of production, have businesses, make a profit, and get to keep the money that they make. Um, It's very obviously a biblical idea. We'll get to that later, but let's define socialism. Okay, let me pull this up. Okay, socialism. Any of, any of various egalitarian economic and political theories or movements advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. So essentially, what socialism advocates for is the not only the redistribution of wealth, but that the government gets to seize the means of production being labor, capital, and land. So the government gets to take that, and whatever is produced from that gets redistributed in order to make everyone equal. Okay, so that's the definition of socialism. Now let's look at the definition of communism. And let me just pull this up right here. Okay, definition of communism. Communism is the political and economic doctrine that aims to replace private property and a profit-based economy with public ownership and communal control of at least the major means of production, mines, mills, and factories, and the natural resources of a society. Communism is thus a form of socialism, a higher and more advanced form, according to its advocates. Exactly how communism differs from socialism has long been a matter of debate, but the distinction rests largely on the communists' adherence to the revolutionary socialism of Karl Marx. Okay, so the idea there, we see the very close similarity between communism and socialism, that they're really not that different because both advocate for the seizing of property, and that's what communism is all about, as we'll see, is the abolition and seizing of private property. Okay, but capitalism is very distinct from those two things. So let's start talking about Karl Marx. Karl Marx stated very plainly, as to summarize um, his literature, particularly, I'm going to be looking at the Communist Manifesto and two of his poems because he wrote poems. It's very clear to me that Karl Marx wanted to dethrone God, get rid of Christianity and religion, and get rid of capitalism and establish socialism and ultimately communism. That is his goal. And let's see what some of his motivations for that were and his explanations of this worldview. Let's see what those are. So I want to go to the Communist Manifesto itself. The Communist Manifesto itself. And I'm trying to pull this up here. Okay, here we go. Can interact with this. And we're going to look at the beginning before the actual chapters. And this is really important because in Marx's poetry, he talks a lot about some pretty evil, satanic stuff. But before we get into that, we'll see a little bit of that here in the beginning of the Communist Manifesto. So, the beginning of the Manifesto of the Communist Party, written by Karl Marx and Engels, it starts out with this: a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. So, the worldview and position of communism is described in a very eerie, creepy manner of haunting Europe. According to Marx, this is a haunting worldview. That's really important. Um, that's really important. When you get to the first chapter, chapter one, bourgeois and the proletarians, so the conflict between the bourgeois and the proletariat. So here we see all of history is, sorry, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Keep that in mind. We'll get back to that, but essentially, bourgeois and proletariat, okay? Bourgeois is the capitalist middle class, and the proletariat is the lower working class. So, the if you are in the middle capitalist category, you are automatically oppressing those in the proletariat category, the lower working class. So this is all according to Marx. I don't actually believe this. This is according to Marxist theory. So let's look at what chapter 2 of the Communist Manifesto then has to say. And this is called Proletariat and Communists. Okay. So right here, we can see um, really some of this class struggle really defined. So the immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all other proletarian parties: formation of the proletariat into a class, and to overthrow the bourgeois supremacy and conquest of political power by the proletariat. So we see what this is really about. This is to give power to a handful of individuals described as the proletariat, to overthrow the bourgeois capitalist oppressors, essentially in this worldview. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property. Generally, we'll see that this is really not true, but the abolition of bourgeois property, so the capitalist version of this. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms, more on that in a second, the exploitation of the many by the few. So here's where this is really important. Here's the defining economic um, application of communism. So here's the definition according to Marx. In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: The abolition of private property. Okay, the abolition of private property. Full-blown communism seeks to get rid of private property and to um, get rid of private ownership, particularly of the means of production, whether that be land, um, capital, or labor. It's all communal, it's all government ran, and there is no more freedom to exercise the right to own or utilize any of those things by the people. That is communism. So in communism, the government would own and control all of the money, really just eventually getting rid of the money, the housing, the food, and the means of production. So you can see immediately why this is an evil and problematic worldview. But for the rest of this, I'm going to read from the Penguin Classics edition of the Communist Manifesto just because I have everything highlighted in here. But you can go to this um, Marxist literature archive on the internet and see all of these things as well. So in this book, on page 239, in chapter 2 that we're in already on the screen, it talks about the abolition of family and private education. So let me go there real quick to page 239. And it says this. And the previous page says this: it has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. So Marx was aware of the criticisms of his position, which are good criticisms, but anyway, next page. Um, Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. Then later he talks about, but you will say, we will destroy the most hallowed of relations, but we replace home education by social. So, in communism, according to Marx, in Marxist theory, the idea is to abolish family, the nuclear biblical model of family, and to get rid of private or familial education or homeschooling. It needs to be social. It needs to be government ran. It needs to be public. That's really important. That's a really important feature of communism. So we have abolition of private property so far, and we have the abolition of family and private education. Um, that is really problematic. But the next thing I'm going to look at is in the same chapter on page 241 that talks about religious objections. So on page 241, it says this: the charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. So if you're a Christian and you recognize that absolute truth exists because God has revealed uh, his word and his will to us in Scripture in the Bible, then you don't have a complaint against communism, according to Marx. Anything that's religious does not deserve serious examination, which is self-refuting because Marxism is a religion. Everyone has a worldview, and we'll see that more soon as well. But he goes on to say this: what else does the history of ideas prove that the intellectual production changes in character in proportion as material production is changed? The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. So Marx's whole idea of oppressor versus oppressed and economics, viewing everything through an economical and oppressor versus oppressed lens, is his basis for essentially the ideas of truth changing. So this is an epistemological point. Um, Marx here is rejecting the idea of absolute truth because that's a Christian concept, that's a religious concept. And in Marxism, since it's an atheistic, relativistic, naturalistic worldview, it doesn't have a basis for anything like absolute truth, which is why it's rejecting it, which is self refuting. Because if Marxism isn't absolutely true, then it isn't true, right? Anyway, so in chapter 2, the same chapter that we're looking at on page 242 through 243, this is another thing that Marx has to say. Undoubted, undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical, sorry, I'm mispronouncing that, philosophical ideas have been modified in the course of historical development, but religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survive this change. Okay, now here's the important part. There are besides eternal truths such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society, but communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality. Instead of constituting them on a new basis, it therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has consisted in the development of class antagonisms, antagonisms that assume different forms at different epochs. More on the antagonism thing later. I know I keep saying that, but we will get to all of it. So this is acknowledging that that communism abolishes or rejects eternal truths. This goes back to what I was saying a second ago about it being relativistic. Um, it rejects absolute truth. And this is because it abolishes all religion and morality. Um, so this is very antithetical to a Christian worldview, which would state that absolute truth and morality exist because God reveals truth in morality. God is love and God is the truth. So we have an objective basis and a revelatory basis to know and understand what is true and what is good. In Marxism, everything I just said isn't true. So again, that's self-refuting because Marx is arguing that this is ought um, to be believed. This ought to be believed. But if morality isn't absolute and isn't objective, then you can't say that. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at are the 10 communist principles on this same very page. So this is what Marx says about establishing communism. These measures will of course be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. Number one, the abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. So getting rid of property, we've seen that already, and capital. Number two, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Man, have we seen that in the United States. Um, it is painful every time I get a paycheck. And the left just keeps trying to raise taxes on everything and say things like the rich should pay their fair share. Number three, the abolition of all right to inheritance. So, again, more abolishing private property and passing on property to your children. And, we see the abolition of family there as well. Number four, the confiscation of the property of all um, immigrants and rebels. Number five, the centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. So the whole idea that monopolies are a capitalist thing, no, government intervention is what makes monopolies thrive. free market capitalism solves that problem through supply and demand and competition. Uh, Government intervention and communism literally calls for that. Number six, the centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. So this is information control. We see that all the time from fake news sources such as CNN, MSNBC, ABC, and even Fox News really partakes in some of that. Okay, next page. Number seven, the extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state by bringing into cultivation of wastelands and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Number eight, equal liability of all to labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. Number nine, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the population over a country. So, number nine is really important. Communism has a global collectivizing goal and purpose here. Wants to get rid of the distinction between town and country and really control the population. Um, it does not want there to be nations. It wants to get rid of and abolish nations. And lastly, um, number 10, free education for all children in public schools. Man, is that a thing in our world right now? Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, and all of that. So, public education has its roots in Marxism. That's all that has to be said about the public education system. We see that happening right now, more than ever in the United States, especially. So, um, page 257 is also a really interesting thing because a lot of people on the left in the Democratic Party, which they are Marxist, I mean, they fit these definitions pretty well. Um, the left will constantly say, well, communism has not been tried, and we just need to try it the right way. And they say the same thing about socialism and say, well, we just need to do democratic socialism. Well, page 257 in the Communist Manifesto, in the edition that I'm reading, talks about democratic socialism and social democrats. So that comes from the Communist Manifesto. Marx already covered that. So no, it doesn't need to be tried the right way. Um, Democratic socialism is how you get communism. And it's obvious because it is communism anyway. Um, so page 258 is the ending of the Communist Manifesto, and I'm going to start here. It says this. In short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. And all these movements they bring to the front as the leading question in each, the property question. So getting rid of property, keep that in mind. No matter what its degree of development at the time, so all forms of socialism and communism are accepted because, according to Marx, they're going to move to the same goal, which is this. In all these movements, they bring to the front. Oh, I read that. So finally, they labor everywhere for the union and agreement of the parties, democratic parties of all countries. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble. So let the capitalists and the Christians tremble at a communistic revolution, the haunting, evil communist revolution. The proletariat The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite. Okay, so that does it for the reading of the Communist Manifesto. So that is a global call to action. There is a global goal here for a Marxist communist utopia. That's really important. Okay, so read from all of that. And again, the main idea is Marx wants to get rid of Christianity, get rid of religion, get rid of private property and capitalism, and establish a the dictatorship of the proletariat, a communist revolution where a few have power over everybody. Um, and that's pretty horrific. So, with that in mind, let's talk about the current communist death rate, which is somewhere in the ballpark of 120 plus million deaths as a result of men, for example, like Mao Zedong in China, who through his great leap forward, um, that resulted in the death of probably like 50 million Chinese citizens. And under the rule of the Soviet Union with Lenin and Stalin in the gulags and everything that they did, that led to the death of 20 to 30 million people. Not to mention the fact that abortion and Sanger also have Marxist and secular roots. Um, Not only because Margaret Sanger was totally opposed to Christian ideals and wanted to fundamentally change the West, but the abortion procedure that is done now was first legalized by Vladimir Lenin in around 1920 in the Soviet Union. So, the death rate of 120 million people, that's not counting abortion. So the number should really be higher, much higher. Um, but altogether, 120 million plus deaths um, through socialism and communism ruling in several nations in the past 100 years. There is no worldview that's even come close to that amount of deaths. Um, okay. And by the way, not only with the examples of Lenin, Mao, and Stalin, but Black Lives Matter, they want to get rid of capitalism in Christianity and the nuclear family, and they call for redistribution of wealth. And Patrisse Cullors said that they were trained Marxists. And Kamala Harris, her and Walls are Marxists. They talk about equality of outcome, equity, and Walls has explicitly said that he promotes socialism. So they hate capitalism, they hate Christianity. That's just a side note, because that's what we're facing as Americans right now. But let's get to Marx's poetry. He has two poems that I want to read. I want to read the whole thing. Invocation and The Pale Maiden. Okay, so I'm going to start with Invocation as soon as I get this up here. And this is really going to reveal a side of Marx that a lot of people seem to really not know about. Okay, so early war, I can't read. Sorry, bear with me. I haven't made videos in a while. Early works of Karl Marx, Book of a Verse. Invocation of one, Invocation of one in despair. Okay. So a God has snatched me, so a God has snatched from me my all. In the curse and rack of destiny, all his worlds are gone beyond recall. Nothing but revenge is left to me. So, showing hatred against really God. Um, and Marx has a revenge that he wants to pursue. So Hates God, wants revenge. Um, on myself, revenge I'll proudly wreak, on that being, that enthroned Lord. So he's raging against the God of the Bible here. Make my strength a patchwork of what's weak, leave my better self without reward. And here we go. I shall build my throne high overhead. Cold tremendous shall its summit be, for its bulwark superstitious dread, for its martial blackest agony. So wanting to build his throne high overhead, presumably the God of the Bible here. Who looks on it with a healthy eye shall turn back, struck deathly pale and dumb, clutched by blind and chill mortality, may his happiness prepare its tomb. And the Almighty's lightning shall rebound. So again, we're back to God here. From that massive iron giant, if he bring my walls and towers down, eternity shall raise them up defiant. So he's defiant towards the God of the Bible. I mean, that's the clearest thing here. Okay, so that's his poem Invocation. So let's look at Pale Maiden, and this one's a bit creepier. Sorry for ruining your evening with this. Okay. Okay, again, the early works of Karl Marx, Book of a Verse. Pale Maiden. The maiden stands so pale, so silent, withdrawn. Her sweet angelic soul is misery torn. Barren can shine no ray. The waves tumble over. There love and pain both play, each cheating the other. Gentle was she, demure, devoted to heaven, an image ever pure the graces had woven. So speaks pretty highly of her at the beginning here. Then came a noble knight, a grand charger he rode, and in his eyes so bright a sea of love flowed. Love smote deep in her breast, but he galloped away. For battle triumph, athirst, not made him stay. Now here's where it gets really dark and weird. All peace of mind is flown. The heavens have sunk. The heart, now sorrow's throne, is yearning drunk. And when the day is past, she kneels on the floor before the holy Christ, a praying once more. So Jesus is mentioned here. But then upon that form, another enroaches to take her heart by storm, gainst herself reproaches. To me your love is given, for time unending, to show your soul to heaven is merely pretending. So now we're mocking this. She trembles in her terror, icy and stark. She rushes out in horror into the dark. She wrings her lily white hands, the teardrops start. Thus fire the bosom brands and longing the heart. Here's a key part. By the way, Marx was really obsessed with Faust, and that was like his favorite story. Thus heaven I've forfeited. I know it full well. My soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell. This shows the satanic nature of Marxist thought. He was so tall, alas, of stature divine, his eyes so fathomless, so noble, so divine. Sorry, so noble, so fine. He never bestowed on me his glances at all, lets me pine hopelessly till the end of the soul. Another his arm may press, may share his pleasure, unwitting he gives me distress beyond all measure. I'm sorry, y'all. This is a long, boring poem. This Marxist literature is not interesting. Sucks. With my soul willingly, with my hopes I'd part, would he but look towards me and open his heart. How cold must the heavens be? Here we go. Where he doesn't shine, a land full of misery with burning and burning with pain. But here the surging flood may deliver me cooling, the hot fire of heart's blood, the bosom's feeling. She leaps with all her might into the spray, into the cold dark night. She's carried away. Her heart, that burning brand, is quenched forever. Her look, that luminous land, is clouded over. Her lips so sweet and tender are pale and colorless. Her form, ethereal, slender, drifts into nothingness, and not a withered leaf falls from the bow. Heaven and earth, sorry, bow. Heaven and earth are deaf, won't wake her now. By mountain, valley, on, the quiet waves race, to dash her skeleton on a rocky place. See, it gets dark. It's like a horror movie that he's like obsessing over. Um, the knight, so tall and proud, embraces his new love. The cithern sings about the joys of true love. Very weird and creepy poem by Karl Marx. Very weird mind and thought process. But that is essentially his position. And let's put that back up here, my little logo. Okay, so what we see here is we see Marx's obsession with really demonic ideals. We see that he's obsessed with satanic stuff like haunting, hell, raging against and defying the God of the Bible, and raising his throne above God. So we've seen so far in Marx's own words and literature what I said at the beginning. He wants to get rid of capitalism and Christianity. He hates Jesus Christ, and he hates anything that is consistent with Jesus Christ. That's what communism is about. It's not simply economic. It's a worldview. It's a religion that seeks to remove and destroy Christianity on a global scale forever. Forever. Um, and with this, I want to read a couple things from um, The World Religions and Cults, Volume 3 by Bodie Hodge and Roger Patterson. And this deals with atheistic and humanistic religions. And we're going to read some things from Lenin here. So Lenin said this about Soviet communism. We must combat religion, that is the ABC of all materialism, and consequently of Marxism. But Marxism is not a materialism which has stopped at the ABC. Marxism goes further. It says we must know how to combat religion, and in order to do so, we must explain the source of faith in religion among the masses in a materialistic way. The combating of religion cannot be confined to abstract ideological preaching, and it must not be reduced to such preaching. It must be linked up with the concrete practice of the class movement, which aims at eliminating the social roots of religion. And so, down with religion, and long live atheism. The dissemination of atheist views is our chief task. So, in Marxist Leninist thought, according to Lenin, atheism is fundamental. You must be militant. No more religion. Get rid of it. No matter how you do it, get rid of it. Get rid of Christianity. And this also gets into the materialistic worldview of communism. Okay. And this gets into the idea of the Marxist and Soviet man concepts because Marxism has a fundamentally different anthropology than Christianity. Um, so here's a little bit on that. In the Soviet Union, under the guidance of the uh, Ale Union Communist Party, a new type of man is being shaped, the man of communist society. He is not an individualistic, sealing himself up in a shell, and therefore he is not poor and empty spiritually. Soviet man has been fused with the whole people and the socialist fatherland. So you're not an individual, and you're not an image bearer. Um, this is just the next stage up in quote unquote human evolution and evolutionary theory applied to Marxist thought to become the communist Marxist Soviet man in a communist Marxist utopia. Um, okay, next thing. from Lenin. Communist morality is based on the struggle for the consolidation and completion of communism. It is what serves to destroy the old exploiting society and to unite all the working people around the proletariat, which is building up a new communist society. So again, um, you see Marx's conflict theory here of oppressor versus oppressed. Um, Morality is basically just the means justify the ends of bringing communism about. It doesn't matter how awful you are and how many people you kill, as long as it results in communism, it's good. That's not absolute objective morality. That's subjective, and that says society determines what is moral, which is self-refuting because when two people or two societies disagree, how do you solve that problem? You can't. There's no objective way to do it. Um, in the Christian worldview, we have absolute morality because whatever God says is right, and He's told us in His law what is right. So that's enough from Marx and Lenin. And let me put these books away here. And let me talk about two concepts that come out of Marxism: historic materialism and dialectic materialism. I'm going to start with historic materialism because that's a little bit easier. So, Marx and Engels were obviously materialists. They denied the supernatural and taught something called matter over mind. Only the material exists. And historic materialism is about that, but it also teaches that all of human history and all changes in human history is purely economical, and it's all uh, the root of it all is economics, and all of history is simply class struggle between the oppressor versus the oppressed, and that with dialectic materialism. So this they go together. So Marx views history as okay, it started with feudalism and imperialism. Now the conflict is with capitalism and socialism and communism. And that's where the dialectic comes in because Marx's dialectic materialism is pulling from the philosophy of Hegel's dialectic. It's the idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So the idea here is so in Hegel's philosophy, the idea is that contradictions can actually exist in reality and synthesize to form a new thing. So you have a thesis, which is a real thing that exists, and antithesis, which contradicts it. They both exist, even though they contradict each other. And they eventually synthesize to form a new thing. And this is essentially a cycle that describes human history. So that is Hegel's idea. Marx takes that and says, okay, you have the thesis, Marx's ideals, communism, and all those things, and you have its antithesis, which is capitalism, which is bourgeois. So fundamental to this oppressor oppressed idea again is economics, and the oppressive capitalists, just because they're capitalists, they are oppressing and oppressive towards the proletariat and the communists and the socialists, which Marx kind of throws in all as one thing. And the capitalists and the so capitalism is contradicting the thesis of Marxism, socialism, and communism. So you have your thesis and antithesis, and according to Marx, they eventually have to synthesize and form a new thing, a communist society that will produce wealth and will be global. Marx taught that communism would inevitably take over capitalism and remove it and be worldwide. Now, that did not happen. So, Marx's Marx's dialectical materialism affirms that contradictions exist in reality, which is what Hegel affirms. That's self-refuting because that you can't have truth that way. From a biblical perspective, that could never happen. Um, okay, so now that I've talked about those things, now I can talk about what's going on in our current current day. Um, Now we don't simply have economic Marxism, classical Marxism. So communism didn't take over. It's a failed experiment, and it's failed everywhere it's been tried. And we've already seen some of that with talking about the Soviet Union, Lenin, Stalin, and everything else. Now we have cultural Marxism because since classical Marxism failed, enter two key characters, Antonio Gramsci and the Frankfurt School. Frankfurt School gives us critical theory, and Gramsci gives us cultural hegemony. I'm going to define these things for both of you guys because these are fundamental to uh, cultural Marxism here. Let me pull this up real quick. I'm trying to get this up here. Oh, where to go? Uh, Hegemony. Where's it at? Sorry, guys. I'm trying to find this in my list. Here we go. Put this above my current image. Nope, still not working. Okay. Hegemony. The dominance of one group over another, often supported by legitimating norms and ideas. The term hegemony is today often used as shorthand to describe the relatively dominant position of a particular set of ideas and their associated tendency to become commonsensical and intuitive, thereby inhibiting the dissemination or even the articulation of alternative ideas. The associated term hegemon is used to identify the actor, group, class, or state that exercises hegemonic power or that is responsible for the dissemination of hegemonic ideas. So Gramsci gives us the idea of cultural hegemony, which is the idea that those in power, those in power are oppressing everybody else, not just economically, but ideologically and culturally. So there's enter cultural Marxism. It's not just economic anymore. And this is where critical theory comes in from the Frankfurt School. So let me also pull this up as soon as I find it. Critical theory. Okay. Critical theory. All right. Put it over hegemony and okay, critical theory is the Marxist inspired movement in social and political philosophy originally associated with the work of the Frankfurt School. Drawing particularly on the thought of Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud, critical theorists maintain that a primary goal of philosophy is to understand and to help overcome the social structures through which people are dominated and oppressed. Believing that science, like the other forms of knowledge, has been used as an instrument of oppression, they caution against a blind faith in scientific progress, arguing that scientific knowledge must not be pursued as an end in itself without reference to the goal of human emancipation. Since the 1970s, critical theory has been immensely influential on the study of history, law, literature, and the social sciences. So, again, right up here, it's associated with the Frankfurt School, and it comes from Karl Marx, and it has to deal with society, the structure, the social structures, um, and really everything that goes on in culture. So the idea, again, you can put that with the concept of hegemony from Gramsci, or cultural hegemony. You have a group of people that is not just economically, but culturally, ideologically, and and in every way possible is oppressing everybody else. And that's where two modern day ideas come into play here. So let's start with CRT, or critical race theory. Critical race theory. Critical race theory is the intellectual and social movement and is an intellectual and social movement and loosely organized framework of legal analysis based on the premise that race is not a natural, biologically grounded feature of physically distinct subgroups of human beings, but a socially constructed, culturally invented category that is used to oppress and exploit people of color. Critical race theorists hold that racism is inherent in the law and legal institutions of the United States, insofar as they function to create and maintain social, economic, and political inequalities between whites and non-whites, especially African Americans or Black people. Critical race theorists are generally dedicated to applying their understanding of the institutional or structural nature of racism to the concrete, if distant, goal of eliminating all race-based and other unjust hierarchies. So you think of a lot of terms here: white privilege, systemic racism, white fragility, multiculturalism. Critical race theory builds on the idea of critical theory. Theory, um, everything is systemic oppression, and we need to destroy it all. Critical race theory, everything is systemically racist, and we need to get rid of it all. Um, it's all oppressing people who are not white, and white people are the ones doing the oppressing just because they're white. Okay, that's essentially the idea here, to really dumb it down, summarize it, and just uh, explain it a little bit. So this gets into some of the founders. So critical race theory was founded by a group of people, two people being Richard Delgado and Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw also defined or founded intersectionality, which I'll define in a second. Richard Delgado's book on critical race theory, in the beginning of this book, explicitly says, I'm trying to find it here, explicitly says that it is taking ideas from guys like Antonio Gramsci. So I'll read that on pages 4 through 5 in Critical Race Theory by Richard Delgado, the fourth edition. As the reader will see, critical race theory builds on the insights of two previous movements: critical legal studies, which is also Marxist, and radical feminism, which is also culturally Marxist, to both of which it owes a large debt. It also draws from certain European philosophers and theorists such as Antonio Gramsci, Michael Foucault, and Derrida. So, this is a Marxist perspective with the goal of communism. Okay, so speaking of that, by the way, um, Peggy McIntosh is the one that has the seminal and founding paper on white privilege, and I have that right here, and there's not a single footnote in her book or in her paper. It's all observational. White privilege does not exist. That is a false idea. Okay, with all that being said, let's define intersectionality. Okay, there's a lot of, bear with me. This is a lot of information. I'm not the best speaker, but I'm trying to do this consistently. Let's get my overlay back there. Intersectionality in social theory, um, is the interaction and cumulative effects of multiple forms of discrimination affecting the daily lives of individuals, particularly women of color. The term also refers more broadly to an intellectual framework for understanding how various aspects of individual identity, including race, gender, social class, and sexuality, interact to create unique experiences of privilege or oppression. So here's how it works. There are layers of oppression just by certain categories you fit in. If you are white, you are oppressive. If you are a white Christian, well, that's another layer that intersects with the previous layer. That's why it's called intersectionality. If you're a white Christian, you're even more oppressive. If you're a white, straight male who's a Christian, you are 4 times as oppressive as the first category. If you are not white, you are oppressed. If you are not white and you're a female, you're even more oppressed. If you're not white and you're a female and you're gay, you're even more oppressed. Add trans to all that, you're even more oppressed. That's as oppressed as you get. Just because you're in those categories means you're either a victim or privileged, oppressed, or an oppressor. That is Marxism. That is Marxism. And it's not a Christian worldview. It's secular, it's atheistic, and it's evil. Okay, to summarize, Marxism calls for the establishment of socialism and communism, which is the abolition of private property in Christianity and religion, the getting rid of capitalism, and governmental social ownership and communal ownership of literally everything. No freedom anymore. Really just giving power to a handful of individuals who are power hungry and bloodthirsty, like Stalin and Lenin and Mao. Not a Christian worldview. So now, finally, I can get to what I wanted to get to. Let's open Logos. Okay, we're in Logos. I've got it pulled up. I'm going to read from and mention a couple places in Scripture that refute and show why Marxism is wrong. Again, in the biblical worldview, we have a standard of absolute truth because God has revealed himself and his will in Scripture, and that's why we have absolute morality. We have an objective basis for truth and morality in the Christian worldview. That's the only worldview that can make sense of it. Without the Bible, you don't have truth, you don't have morality. The Christian God is the only standard, absolute, infallible standard of right and wrong. Okay, so Exodus 20 is what I have pulled up. Verses 13 and onward talk about not murdering, not stealing, and not coveting. God's law here explicitly says not to steal. In Marxism, your property is stolen from you. So that's one way that it's wrong. You should not covet. You should not want what isn't yours and shouldn't be yours. Marxism is built on envy and jealousy and covetousness because it wants what isn't yours. It wants to redistribute wealth. And do not murder because it's responsible for the deaths of 120 million people and who knows how many more via abortion. So Exodus 20 shows that this is a morally bankrupt worldview. Now, what about redistribution of wealth and heavy taxation? Well, we have a standard here. In Exodus 30, beginning at verse 12, it says this of taxation. When you take a census of the sons of Israel to number them, then each one of them shall give a ransom for himself to Yahweh, to the Lord, when you number them, so that there will be no plague among them when you number them. This is what everyone who is numbered shall give, half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs, half a shekel as a contribution to Yahweh. Everyone who is numbered from 20 years old and over shall give the contribution to Yahweh. Here's the key part, verse 15. The rich shall not pay more, and the poor shall not pay less than the half shekel when you give the contribution to Yahweh to make atonement for yourselves. Okay, so biblical taxation in God's law isn't oppressive. You're not, it's not decimating your bank account. And the rich shall not pay more, and the poor shall not pay less. So, this whole idea that we need to distribute all of our money uh, via governmental taxation theft to the poor is not consistent with God's law here. And the idea that the rich need to pay their fair share as if they don't already is unbiblical. It is utterly unbiblical. Deuteronomy 19, verse 14, is where I'm going to go next. So, Deuteronomy 19, verse 14, right here. Sorry, 19, verse 14. I went to chapter 14. Chapter 19, verse 14. You shall not move your neighbor's boundary mark, which the ancestors have set, in your inheritance which you will inherit in the land that Yahweh your God gives you to possess. Private property, property rights, you don't get to take it. You don't even get to move the boundary mark. Fundamental. You have the freedom to have things. Okay. Going back to Logos here. I want to read from Matthew chapter 20, and this is Jesus' parable of the laborers in the vineyard. So Matthew 20. We're going to see a couple things here. Okay, here we go. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. When he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius for the day, he sent them into his vineyard. So he owns land, he owns his own business, he's an entrepreneur. And he hires laborers and they agree on a price. He no government intervention here. And he went about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to those he said, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you. And so they went. So he has the freedom to give him what he wants. And they can agree to it. They're free to do so, or to reject it. Again he went out about the 6th and 9th hour, and he did the same thing. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, why have you been standing here idle all day long? They said to him, because no one hired us. He said to them, you go into the vineyard too. So he's hiring people. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last group to the first. When those hired about the 11th hour came, each one received a denarius. When those hired first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they grumbled at the landowner, so he owns land, saying, these last men have worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden who have borne the burden in the scorching heat of the day. But he answered and said to one of them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go, but I wish to give to this last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what is my own? Or is your eye envious because I am generous? So the last shall be first and the first last. So I don't think that requires a whole lot of explanation. That's just really obvious that communism is antithetical to what's being said there. The owner gets to do what he wants with his money. He gets to pay his employees what they've agreed upon. Money exists. The payment is the payment belongs to the employers. And it is lawful for the owner to do with what is his. And someone who disagrees with that is envious. at his generosity, and he gets to own land. Okay, so let me go back to OBS here. Pull my image up. Let's get rid of these definitions. And I'll mention a couple other uh, scriptures here. Okay, so um, Luke 10:7, repeated in 1 Timothy 5:18, the laborer deserves their wages. So they don't get to be taken. 2 Thessalonians 3:10, if you don't work, you don't eat. Psalm 2 and Romans 13, the government's role is to obey Jesus and to punish evil, not to seize property and redistribute wealth. Okay, so we see, finally, from a biblical worldview, Marxism, socialism, and communism is fundamentally not just wrong, it's evil. Marxist thought is incompatible with Christianity. Um, the Bible clearly teaches free market capitalism, and obviously it teaches that Christianity should continue to exist. So that's my critique of the Communist Manifesto and Marxism. There's a lot more that could be said, but essentially it's wrong because the Bible says it's wrong, and the Bible is true. So um, if you're listening to this and you're a Christian, um, be edified, share this, um, teach this to others. And if you're not a Christian, repent and believe the gospel, turn from your sin and trust in Jesus Christ. Trust in Jesus Christ for your salvation, because only He can save you, and He can save you from a morally bankrupt, evil Marxist worldview, and He will utterly crush Marxism. So thank you for listening, and stay tuned to more apologetics and gaming content. Peace out.